Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Brother Harold. Thank you very much all for coming in, being on here this evening. This being the Freedom Friday Forum of November 10th, 2023. Glad to have you aboard. It is such a wonderful thing to know that people care about what's happening in Africa, especially since there are all these distractions. You know, the Israeli-Palestine situation, the Ukraine-Russia situation. There's stuff happening all over the world. And there's something that people aren't mentioning, which I'm very concerned about, which is the Venezuela-Guyana border situation. But anyway, it's nothing, there's no hostility. but there are certainly threats and what do we call it? Grand charging? Yeah. So anyway, we have a very important discussion here tonight, Brother Maurice. Thank you for being on. But before we get into everything, I think you have it all set up of how you're going to go, right?
Yes.
So what I'm going to do now is go through the normal starting rituals, and then we'll turn it over to you.
Sounds good.
All right. All right. Well, normally we open up the UNIA-ACL Pledge to the Flag, this being the Woodson Banneker Jackson Bay Division program. And, you know, we want people to understand that the UNIA-ACL Rehabilitating Committee 2020 is serious business. We're serious about rehabilitating. We're serious about the African world. We're serious about African redemption. We're serious about the discontinuation of white supremacy and all that goes with that. Anyway, we start. The official UNIA Pledge to the Flag. I commit my body, mind, and spirit to the protection, defense, and security of the red, black, and green. I dedicate my life to the redemption of Mother Africa and the liberation of her scattered Black children. I accept for myself and my descendants the teachings of universal African nationalism, and I promise that our children will be instilled with the purpose and knowledge of themselves as African people, in order that the cause of our struggle will neither falter nor fail until all Black people are free and united through one God, one aim, one destiny. Of course, that's not the only thing that we do here, because some people, and we may have some in the audience right now, and then there may be those who, if they're not in the audience now, later on when they go on YouTube, or they may see this and don't know who or what we're about. The Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League is a social, friendly, humanitarian, charitable, educational, institutional, constructive, and expansive society, and is founded by persons desiring to the utmost to work for the general uplift of the African people of the world. And the members pledge themselves to do all in their power to conserve the rights of their noble race and to respect the rights of all mankind, believing always in the brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God. The motto of the organization is one God, one aim, one destiny. Therefore, let justice be done to all mankind, realizing that if the strong oppresses the weak, confusion and discontent will ever mark the path of man. But with love, faith, and charity towards all, the reign of peace and plenty shall be oh, I'm confused. Sorry about that. Okay. We'll continue now, Brother Mo. Let me make a little introduction of you here. You two, you're no stranger to the Freedom Friday Forum.
Right.
And it's we always come to you when we want to know what's going on in Central Africa or any part of Africa for that matter.
Right.
Because we know you're covering all those areas. Brother Maurice, co-founder of the Pan-African Solidarity Organization, Friends of the Congo, will share his organization's assessment of the latest development on the African continent with a particular focus on the Pan-African Union that is combating French-Neo Colonialism in West Africa. In addition, he will address the upcoming 8th and 9th Pan-African Congresses. Finally, Maurice will share the organizing unfolding among Congolese youth in their quest to redeem African or reclaim African consciousness in the heart of the African continent. Brother Maurice Carney, the floor is yours, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, brother, for inviting me, inviting Friends of the Congo. As you said, we're no stranger to UNIA, and we're really honored to be back again to talk first and foremost about the work that we're doing, and secondly, the landscape in which we're doing our work, both the geopolitical landscape and the African world landscape. So for those who may be joining us for the first time, Friends of the Congo is a Pan-African solidarity institution, very much in the tradition of the Friends of Abyssinia, that was established by C.L.R. James in the 1930s to come to the side of the Ethiopians when they were under attack by the Italians. And in that same Pan-African spirit, we, Friends of the Congo, gathered as we saw yet again the heart of the African continent under assault, and this time by proxy forces, ultimately backed by the West, particularly the United States and England. And we've been doing this work under the aegis of Friends of the Congo for the past 2 decades, really almost a quarter century. And time goes by really fast. So Friends of the Congo has 2 overarching aims. One is to raise global consciousness about what's unfolding in the heart of the African continent. And the second is to provide support to progressive Pan-African institutions on the ground in the Congo who are waging an indefatigable battle for a free and liberated Congo and a free and liberated Africa. Now, before I get into my presentation, I know I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge what was happening in Palestine, in the occupied Palestine by a settler colonial state of Israel, Zionist settler colonial state. I know there's been a lot of discussion, or at least I've seen some discussion in the community as to whether or not we should be focused on Palestine or Africa and African affairs, and whether or not Palestine is taken away from the situation or the attention, taking attention away from what's unfolding on the continent. It's kind of interesting because if we all remember, if you were to peruse or even read the declarations coming out of the 1945 Manchester Congress, the 5th Pan-African Congress, you'll see there, although W.E.B. Du Bois, Jomo Kenyatta, and George Padmore, Kwame Nkrumah, Amy Ashford, Garvey, all these figures who were the organizers and leaders at the 5th Pan-African Congress, and At the time, just about all the African countries were for all intents and purposes, under colonial rule. We find that coming out of the 45 Pan-African Congress in Manchester, not only was there a declaration for free and liberated Africa and combating of colonialism, but there was also an element of internationalism. That is to say, and Nkrumah articulated it well, that they were in solidarity with the oppressed masses of the world. So to be a Pan-Africanist is not solely to focus on Africa, but it is to be in solidarity, to express internationalism, be in solidarity with oppressed masses of the world. And why is that? It's that way because the same forces from which the Palestinians are catching hell are the same forces that are working against our interests here in the United States and also on the African continent. We just look at our revolutionary country in the Caribbean, for example. We see in Cuba that the blockade around Cuba by the United States is supported only by Israel in the world. We look at our brothers and sisters who were fighting during the anti-apartheid era in South Africa. Israel was locked in step and barrel with the apartheid state in South Africa. So it's no surprise that they've developed an apartheid state today in Palestine. So it doesn't take any energy from us, doesn't distract any attention for us to be in solidarity with oppressed, colonized, those oppressed people living under occupation. And as Dr. King alerted us in his message, his letter coming out of the Birmingham jail, he said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So injustice in Palestine is a threat to justice throughout the African continent. It's a threat to justice in DC. It's a threat to justice throughout the US. Because the billions of dollars that go to Israel for its war machine and to Egypt to keep it quiet, so to speak, those are dollars that are not going to education, our school system, our healthcare, the basic needs that we have in the United States. So we can talk about it later, certainly. However, I don't see the need to characterize what's unfolding or the focus in Palestine as necessarily distracting. So that being said, really, what time is it? And you know, when we ask what time it is, we have to go to our ancestor, John Henry Clark, and I'm going to quote from John Henry Clark. You know, he said that history is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day, right? He says it is a compass that they use to find themselves. He goes on to say, it's the compass they use to find themselves on the map of human geography. It tells them where they are, but more importantly, what they must be. So for us in this moment, what time is it? With the instability that we see in different parts of the world, particularly in Ukraine with Europeans fighting each other, and in Palestine. Interestingly enough, African people have made the greatest advances when Europeans fight each other, right? When they go to war against each other, they have less time, less focus on us. So I know there's a tremendous amount of organizing done in the Pan-African Congresses, from Henry Sylvester Williams in the first Pan-African Conference in 1900 in London, to the series of congresses organized by W.E.B. Du Bois, culminating in the 45 Manchester Conference. Certainly the work of the namesake of UNIA, Marcus Garvey, and the global organization, the unparalleled, unprecedented global organization that he mounted. However, the war on the continent of Europe provided that breathing space, that opportunity for Africans to mobilize and to start to chip away at the colonial era that had its roots in the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference. So to see Europeans fighting in Europe, that presents an opportunity for Africans to get their act together, to seize the moment. Now, with the United States seeking full spectrum domination, they aim to keep a lid on any kind of regional autonomy that takes place anywhere on the planet, right? Even in Southeast Asia with China. They're not only trying to prevent China from becoming a world power, a global power, but also a regional power, right? So they, in an effort to maintain the lid on African sovereignty, both President Biden and before him President Trump had issued statements or declarations from the White House, white papers in essence, about the great power competition for Africa, primarily because of its resources and its strategic importance, being the richest continent on the planet, bar none. So you've even had a situation where Black members of Congress have gone on to sponsor bills that try to curtail the sovereignty of Africans. I'm speaking specifically of the Russian Malign Activity Act, sponsored by Gregory Meeks out of New York. Basically, for all intents and purposes, threatening African nations, right, about their relationship with Russia. So, and even before that, we see that on the African continent, in an attempt to curtail Chinese influence, we see George Bush, Donald Rumsfeld in 2008, breathing life into Heritage Foundation, a think tank in Washington, D.C., paper about establishing an African command on the African continent. We talk about it casually, but really you have to really take a look at it. Here it is that the United States is establishing a command in Africa that the Africans haven't established themselves. There is no Africa command as Nkrumah called for. But the United States established an Africa command, a command that was started by Bush and Rumsfeld, but it took a Black president in Barack Obama, headed up initially by a Black general, Kip Ward, who graduated from Morgan State, to accelerate the militarization of the African continent. And this is really critical. This acceleration of the militarization of the African continent, that is to say, establishing bases, like for example, the drone base that they have in Niger, $100 million drone base in Agadez in Niger, $25 million a year to run it, right? This acceleration of US military presence on the African continent through bases, through secret special forces, through increased drone attacks, particularly in East Africa, in the Horn of Africa, with the training of African militaries, all in an attempt to curtail the influence or the expansion of Chinese presence on the African continent. So we see during the Obama administration, the Afrikan increased 2,000%, right, in terms of US military presence. Remember, there was a time when George Bush went to travel to Africa in 2000, I believe it was 2009, trying to push Afrikan and appeal to African heads of state to establish a military base on that, or to establish the headquarters of Afrikan on the African continent. It's headquartered in Stuttgart, Germany. And there was almost all of the African heads of state rejected the Bush's proposal. There's only one leader that was amenable to it, and that was Ellen Johnson Sirleaf when she was president of Liberia, which is understandable, Liberia in a lot of respects. You know, if you know the history of Liberia, it's basically the US's first colony on the African continent for all intents and purposes, right? So we have a situation where we're having great power competition between China, United States and China for influence and control on the African continent. And then in comes Russia as well, who has long had relations with the African continent, but increasing its military presence through its paramilitary formation, the Wagner Group, who cut its teeth in the Central African Republic. And quid pro quo, you know, security, basically security for minerals, you know, diamonds or what have you. So this is a landscape in which we're currently operating in terms of African states, African populations, where there is intense competition for, some people call it another scramble for Africa, a modern day scramble for Africa, but really the scramble it's been ongoing. You know, the scramble for Africa goes, it's a continuation of 500 years, right? Where the European powers operating under the aegis of the doctrine of discovery, was capturing land throughout the globe, but in particular in the Americas, and they needed the labor in order to develop the land that they captured. And so you have this massive extraction of Africans, right, coming out of the African continent, almost half of them coming out of the Congo region, according to UNESCO and the Emory University slavery database. There's a website called Slave Voyages, slavevoyages.org. You can check it out, where they have the mapping of the trafficking of Africans from the continent to the Americas. And contrary to popular belief, West Africa wasn't the dominant point of extraction. It was in the Congo region that 4 out of every 10 Africans that were trafficked to the Americas came out of the Congo region. So since that time, starting with the extraction of the most precious resource of all, the human bodies, African bodies, not just in terms of labor, but also in terms of intellect. And from that period on, we find ourselves today, or finds ourselves still in the midst of that scramble for the African continent. And Nkrumah rephrased it. You know, we've been through phases, certainly slavery. In the case of Congo, private ownership, personal ownership, colonialism, right through to the 60s. And then Nkrumah, in his classic work on neocolonialism, coined the phrase neocolonialism, where you have the Africans controlling, to the extent that you can call it that, controlling the political levers of power, but not the economic levers of power, where the framework, the imprint that was established for the past 500 years, that is an imprint and a framework of extraction of resources from the continent, remains in place. In the neocolonial era, the resources are extracted for pennies on the dollar, and as Nkrumah lays out, they come back in in finished products at a much higher value, where Africans are cut out of the value chain. So it's not a new scramble for Africa, but it's the latest stage of the scramble for Africa that we're in right now, this moment. And for the youth that we work with, the folks we work with on the continent in our solidarity efforts, the focus is on unifying the African continent, building on the Pan-Africanism of Nkrumah, building on the Pan-Africanism of Sekou Touré, building on the Pan-Africanism of Modibo Keita, building on the Pan-Africanism of Patrice Lumumba. And in a lot of respects, the young people are, in the spirit of Amilcar Cabral, returning to the source, learning the history of the Pan-African movement, drawing up on traditional African principles and ideas to inform their contemporary movement. And this is what we see happening not only in the Congo, but really throughout the African continent, and probably most acutely in West Africa for its own particular reasons. West Africa is, at least Francophone, French-speaking West Africa, is a product of France-Afrique. And France-Afrique is really the unique French element that's brought to the exploitation and the domination of Africa, that came out of, de Gaulle in response to the anti-colonial movement, where de Gaulle sought to maintain the French-speaking countries in the French sphere of influence, basically colonialism just by another name. And you all know the story that the one leader, well, there are other leaders, but the one successful leader that resisted de Gaulle and his colonialism and mobilized his people in 1958 to reject de Gaulle, to reject the French, was Sekou Touré of Guinea. So what we see is that even though, quote unquote, the French West African nations got independence, they were still, for all intents and purposes, under colonial rules, certainly as it relates to their currency and their monetary policy, with the CFA franc having to be deposited in French banks, where you have a situation where Africans have their money in French banks, but if they need a loan, they have to go to the France to get a loan off their own money, basically. So what you've seen over the years is a movement among young people in West Africa, the intellectuals, the grassroots activists who have been mobilizing to cut the umbilical cord, so to speak, with France, to pressure and kick out some of, if not all, of the French lackeys that are in West Africa. And we saw this acutely in 2014 in Burkina Faso, when the youth rose up, led by Ballet Citoyen and the citizen broom in English, and women's groups, rural groups, to kick out longtime head Negro in charge in West Africa, Blaise Compaoré, right? So this is where we see Pan-African undertaking. I call it a Pan-African undertaking, what unfolded in Burkina Faso, because those youth drew inspiration from another youth group in Senegal, Yaoundé Mar, which basically means fed up. They worked with Abdoulaye Wade for him to get in power, but when it came for him to leave power, he didn't want to leave, so they mobilized against him, and they successfully blocked his path to getting continuing his tenure in office. So these youth movements out of Senegal, Yaoundé Mar, these youth movements out of Burkina Faso, Ballet Citoyen in 2014. And then they joined up, Myanmar, Ballet Citoyen, joined up with youth groups in the Congo in 2015 in an attempt to pressure the Congolese government led by Joseph Kabila at the time in order to prevent him, block him from extending and staying in power. So you have this Pan-African activity brewing and being successful in West Africa. It wasn't successful in the Congo. The youth were jailed. The youth from Senegal were jailed. Congolese youth were jailed. Some of them had to be run into exile. But the undertaking by these youth groups and a Pan-African solidarity was clear and present. Now I have to add a caveat to it in that these youth were Pan-Africanists, but they weren't necessarily, they were Pan-Africanists to some extent, right? Anti-French, but they certainly weren't anti-imperialists, right? And that's an important distinction because we found some of them working in cahoots with US embassies, right? Whether it's a US embassy in Senegal, US embassy in Burkina Faso, and even the US embassy in Congo, right? That they work with. So they weren't anti-imperialists. That is not to say that there wasn't more radical youth groups throughout West Africa that were Pan-Africanists, that were anti-French, and anti-imperialists across the board. I'm thinking of young brother Kemi Seba of Urgence Panafricaniste, and he would often clash with those youth because of their deficit when it came to being, anti-imperialists. They've certainly mended over the years. So if we look at the 2012, 2014, 2015, we see the Pan-African expression being manifested among the Congolese youth. I'm sorry, among the African youth in West Africa. Now, at the same time, right, we see a number of other things happening. We see, I mentioned to you before, the militarization of social space, right, in West Africa, really throughout Africa, but certainly in West Africa. And then, the United States bared its face, it dropped its mask, where Afrikan, it presented Afrikan as being a humanitarian undertaking, going to build wells and provide support for Africans. But we saw that they joined in concert with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to overthrow the Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And that overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya created instability throughout the Sahel. Countries like Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger. Throughout the Sahel, we saw instability where the increased so-called increased terrorism, wash with weapons. So that created an environment where the people were desperate or have been desperate for security, insecurity that was triggered by NATO, led by France. At the time, it was Nicolas Sarkozy, and I think you all remember Hillary Clinton in her infamous interview in 60 Minutes with her famous cackle about Muammar Gaddafi. She says, we came, we saw, and he died. And then she breaks out laughing, which really drives home the point how evil these folks are, in their lack of, they have no compunction when it comes to killing. Some people are trying to redeem President Obama for Libya, where they're saying, oh, he said it was the greatest regret of his presidency, which is not true. That's not what Obama said. He didn't say that. He said that, Obama said that, I did the right thing. We did the right thing in going into Libya. My regret, that's what Obama said, my regret is I didn't do enough after we overthrew Gaddafi, right? He didn't say I regret overthrowing Gaddafi. He said I regret not doing enough after the overthrow of Gaddafi. So that's an important distinction. There's no redemption there. He's very clear, very lucid that he felt that Gaddafi had to be overthrown, even if you look at the way Libya is today and the whole Sahel region. So what we see coming into 2019, 2020 is this increased militarization on the part of the US. After the overthrow of Gaddafi, the need for the military to receive even more funding. They had what they call the G5, representing the 5 Sahel nations, seeking $500 million, $500 million from the US and from Europe in order to beef up its security. At the same time that this is being done, the beefing up of the security, the increasing of the militarization of the social space, of the political space, we see the people, we see the organizers pushing Pan-Africanism, organizing anti-French French rallies, exposing the naked nature of French neo-colonialism, where you have a situation where the resources are extracted from West Africa to France and Europe to serve the energy needs of France and Europe, for example. Yet the needs of the people in West Africa are not being served. Their resources are taken out from under them, shipped off to Africa, to Europe, and to serve Europeans. So the people are very clear about this. They're being politically educated about the system that's in place, a system that's got them trapped, a system that's got them impoverished. And at the same time, right, at the same time, what we see is that those leaders that are in the pocket of France and their terms have expired, they continue to try and stay in power and conduct what we call constitutional coups, right? And France made it clear that they wouldn't hesitate to come in and back those constitutional coups. They wouldn't hesitate to come in and weigh in on one side of a disputed election, as we saw in the Ivory Coast with Laurent Gbagbo and Alassane Ouattara, right? So the people are seeing this, where you have French troops coming in on the streets, of Abidjan and controlling the movement of Ivorians, right? Stopping them on the street, checking their cars, basically bombing neighborhoods. So you have this resentment continuing to develop. And today we see the resentment being expressed in a way that through coups. And part of the reason why they're occurring through coups is because of the beefing up of the security sector that the United States, almost all of these coup leaders are either trained by the US or France, but they're responding to the dictates of the people. There's a really interesting study that was done by the United Nations, and let me get the name of that study for you, by the United Nations Development Fund. And I highly recommend that people check it out. It's called Soldiers and Citizens, Military Coups and the Need for Democratic Renewal in Africa. Soldiers and Citizens, Military Coups and the Need for Democratic Renewal in Africa. So, and there's a website that goes along with it as well. It's the website is soldiersandcitizens.org, soldiersandcitizens.org. Why do I bring this study up? Because we see these different coups occurring in West Africa, and what the United Nations Development Fund did is they did a survey of of thousands of West Africans, right? And interestingly enough, the study itself was about 300 pages or so. And in that study, I think Russia may have been mentioned 2 or 3 times. Wagner, I think, was mentioned one time or so. But the politicians in the U.S., folks in the West would have you think that Africans are being influenced by Russia to resist French neocolonialism or to resist U.S. imperialism. But the study document says the concerns of people are that they don't have the jobs, they don't have security, they don't have good education, they're not benefiting from their resources. So today, when we see demonstrations in Niger, for example, and you have the reporters put a mic in front of people, the people are articulating a clear demand that we have these resources, we have the riches in our soil, we're not benefiting from it, but France is, right? So what we have is a critical mass of Africans, particularly in West Africa, who are clear about neocolonialism, or clear about the need for their leaders, right, to represent their interests, to respond to their interests. Right now, it's being, I shared with you earlier, we saw how the youth mobilized in Senegal and Burkina Faso. Now we see the military mobilizing, but rest assured, the people will rise up against these military leaders if they're not responding to the needs of the people. And not only the basic needs of the people, but the people are also articulating a Pan-African agenda, right? And that's in part, and the military leaders are responding to that Pan-African agenda. That's why just in September, we saw the establishment of the Alliance of Sahel States, right? The Alliance of Sahel States by the three, we're talking about Niger, we're talking about Burkina Faso and Mali, a Pan-African formation under what they call the Litako-Gorma Charter. And Litako-Gorma is a region that connects those three countries. And the alliance, the Pan-African Alliance, is primarily a military alliance. The Litako-Gorma treaty, Litako-Gorma, if you look up Litako-Gorma, it goes back really to the 1970s, where that region is tried to unify. But these leaders today, the Assimi Goïta and Ibrahim Traoré, they have come under a Pan-African umbrella, driven by a military alliance, right? At the same time, what we see is, in addition to some of the youth formations that I've mentioned to you, we've seen state actors even getting into the fray to some extent, where just this past May, the Togolese government, not a fan of Adama for sure, but the Togolese family has ruled Togo for, what, a half a century? The Togolese government had the initial working group of the 9th Pan-African Congress, that they call it, right? In May of this year, which the 9th Pan-African Congress is to take place in the fall, early winter of 2024. And it's a Togolese government, driven by the Togolese government in concert with the African Union. And the rallying ministers, our sister from foreign minister from South Africa was a key representative. They had folks here from Brazil. And now they're pushing to organize the 9th Pan-African Congress. So there is an opportunity there to meld or join the political Pan-African push, right, with the military Pan-African push. And it'd be interesting to see how that unfolds over the coming year. Now, with the 9th Pan-African Congress, they are supposed to organize regional congresses. One in Southern Africa, presumably organized by South Africa. Another one to be held in East Africa, and even one in North and West Africa, and of course in the diaspora, where maybe somewhere in the Caribbean or possibly Brazil. But you have the march towards the 9th Pan-African Congress. I'm going to digress a little bit because I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the 8th Pan-African Congress. That is really the third 8th Pan-African Congress, because there have been 2 8th Pan-African Congresses held already, right? One in South Africa, you know, with Hilary Beckles, and I think it was 2004 or something like that, and then brother Horace Campbell in Ghana. I think it was 2017. I have to remember that. I was there for the 8th. So there are 2 8th Pan-African Congresses that have been held already. And then Ambassador Arikana is talking about initially holding an 8th Pan-African Conference in Zimbabwe. But I think that hasn't gathered any steam. And now, apparently, from the last that I've heard, and you know, those of you who are in the know can share with me that she's now looking to connect with Museveni in Uganda around to organize the 8th Pan-African Congress, the 3rd 8th Pan-African Congress in Uganda. And of course, people, you know, there's been controversy around Museveni himself and his being a host or part of organizing Pan-African Congress. There's a lot of debate that took place leading up to the 8th Pan-African Congress in Accra. So you have these Pan-African activity taking place on the military front, on the political front, on the nation state in terms of the African Union and its member states, at the grassroots level. So there's a tremendous amount of Pan-African activity and unfolding, not just in West Africa, but if you're following closely, recently, just this past week actually, we saw the joining of forces in Kenya with PLO Lumumba and Julius Malema, inaugurating the Pan-African Institute in Kenya. And Malema was there as the keynote speaker, but not just as a speaker, declared that he's going to, and the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, going to support the Pan-African Institute, not only morally, but also materially and financially. So they're saying we're going to put money behind this institute that's was recently developed by PLO Lumumba out of Kenya. So there's just a tremendous amount of Pan-African activity, really to the point where Pan-Africanism has become vogue to a certain extent, right? And, you know, there were always, how can I say, there were always competing tendencies in Pan-Africanism. I mean, both Du Bois and Garvey are Pan-Africanists, right? But they had different views of how they're going to carry out a Pan-African agenda. So we're seeing different tendencies develop around Pan-Africanism. I have to resort to my brother out of Ivory Coast, Nakalogoke. He initiated in 2008 what he called the revival of Pan-Africanism, where he's been pushing a Pan-African agenda coming out of the Ivory Coast and engaging youth movements throughout West Africa, where we see really this revival of Pan-Africanism. We see the Caribbean Pan-African Network, for example, by David Comison, that is engaging the African continent. And this coming week, they'll be in Accra, in Ghana, for the reparations conference that they'll be having. Before, earlier in the middle of the summer, they had a reparation conference in Barbados, where the Africans came. And now folks from the Caribbean, folks from here, are going to Accra for a reparations conference that has got the imprint, the stamp of the African Union. And for those of you who've been following the reparations movement and the sometimes contentious relationship between the Africans heads of state, especially certainly coming out of the Durban conference in 2001, we see that there was some resistance coming from the Africans. And then now what we see is the African heads of state embracing reparations, the reparation movement. So you have that Pan-African activity taking place as well with the folks coming out of the Caribbean. Now, we have to call out, some of those blatant, how can I say, hijacking of Pan-Africanism, right? Because Paul Kagame was in the Caribbean and, visiting different Caribbean countries, and it was being dubbed as a Pan-African trip. And we're like, no, and that was a Commonwealth trip. Paul Kagame is a member of the Commonwealth. He's going to the Caribbean under the auspices of the Commonwealth. People are trying hard to put the label of Pan-Africanist on Paul Kagame, but that's just not, it doesn't bear how can I say, it doesn't bear the, it's not, what he does is not in the tradition of Pan-Africanism, right? Because I don't know, just think about it. Can you imagine Nkrumah, Lumumba, Toure, right, Modibo Keita, vying, actively pursuing membership in the British Commonwealth, while at the same time pursuing membership in the Francophonie, right? And not just membership, but vying for the presidency of the Francophonie. So Rwanda heads up the Francophonie today. Louise Mushikiwabo is the president of the Francophonie. These are the modern day, can be seen as the modern day arms of the neo-colonialism, right? So to cast Kagame as a Pan-Africanist, as some of our comrades do, I think is a misreading of Kagame himself and of the quote-unquote Rwanda miracle, right? In addition to that, he farms out his military to French government and corporate interests, right? And we just referenced Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, where Kagame sent its military ostensibly to defend the natural gas interests of Total, and rewarded by the European Union with around $26 million or so. So I think we can be more critical. By the same token, we see William Ruto, who's presenting himself as a Pan-Africanist as well. And some people arguing that his intention to go into Haiti and send Kenyan police force into Haiti is a Pan-African mission, right? Which is so far from the truth. So I'm saying that because we see that these certain leaders are trying to hijack Pan-Africanism because it's in vogue. It's embraced by African youth, and it is this how can I say, reconnecting to a Pan-African tradition that I think offers the greatest hope for the continent. And really, it's a call for us, those of us who are Africans abroad, to be engaged in a very pragmatic way with our young brothers and sisters on the continent, particularly those of us who are in the empire. We have a dual role. One is challenging the empire from within, right? Exposing Afrikan, a la Black Alliance for Peace, with its Shut Down Afrikan campaign, which is a critical effort where you have Africans in the empire, even if they can put as many black faces at the head of Afrikan as they want, it's our duty to resist the African command from here in the United States. It's our duty to educate our people, political education, to be in the universities, to be in the independent African schools, to be in church basements, to be wherever we need to be, educating people about the role of the empire, what Afrikan is. It's not what Kip Ward, because, you know, he was the first one to be appointed, a black man from Morgan. It's not what he said, building wells and doing humanitarian work. No, Afrikan is what joined up with NATO to decapitate Gaddafi. So that's one of our responsibilities. And second is being in concrete solidarity with Africans, young Africans on the continent. And with Friends of the Congo, that's really the spirit of our organization, but we operate under the principles coming out of the All African People's Conference of 1958 in Ghana, in Accra. Really the head organizer, George Padmore, was a key organizer of the conference. And coming out of that conference, we saw Modibo Keita and Touré and Nkrumah look into Congo, right, as playing a central role in the Pan-African project of the United States of Africa, right? And Nkrumah wrote some 15 books or so. And the one country he dedicated a book to was the Congo, the challenge of Congo. And in the foreword, he talks about how Nkrumah and the nascent formation of the United States of Africa, they saw Congo serving as the capital of the United States of Africa, right? That was central to the advancement of the African continent. Now, what's interesting, both the revolutionary leaders, the independence leaders, right, and the enemies of Africa are clear about the centrality of the Congo. Right? Because when the United States, its first foray into post-independence Africa was in the Congo. And it was the largest budget at the time, right? Covert action that the United States mounted. That's how important that they felt the Congo was. And Larry Devlin, the chief of station of the CIA, in his book, Chief of Station Congo, he said that we had to overthrow Lumumba, right? And in his book, he lays out just, it's really a playbook for overthrowing a democratically elected leader and crushing a nascent democratic movement. He said, if we didn't overthrow Lumumba, not only would we have lost Congo, we would have lost all of Africa, right? So we see the enemies of Africa and the revolutionary figures acknowledge and recognizing the centrality of the Congo for a whole host of reasons, right? In terms of its geographic location in the heart of the African continent, straddling the equator, the size of Western Europe, the only country on the African continent to have 9 other African countries bordering it. So whatever happens there can immediately affect those 9 countries. Arguably, the richest country, not just in Africa, on the planet in terms of natural resources. Economists say there's $24 trillion worth of natural resources in the Congo. I looked at how they came up with that figure. I don't, you know, the veracity of it is questionable. However, the fact that that kind of estimation can be made about the Congo is not questionable, right? 24 trillion is about the GDP of the United States. And a country where the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations says that if it realizes its agricultural potential, it can feed the entire African continent almost twice over 2 billion people, right? African continent is right 1.3 billion. So if you're talking about food security for the continent as a whole, Congo, you can do that just with Congo alone, right? If you're talking about energy security, you can do that with Congo. I'm sure you've heard the stories of the vaunted Inga dams, where when Lumumba came here to the United States, he met a enterprising young woman who was keen to be engaged in Africa, and he invited her to the Congo. By the time she got to the Congo, Lumumba was assassinated, but she worked there nonetheless to work on the Inga Dam. That's Dr. Yvonne Sion, and those of you who know her, she's the mother of Dave Chappelle, a famous comedian. So whether we're talking about energy, agriculture, whether we're talking about mineral resources, and not just any mineral resources, right? Mineral resources that are indispensable to global industry. There is no clean energy transition without Congo's cobalt. It just isn't, right? Congo produces 70% of the world's cobalt. And if you add up all the countries in the world that produce cobalt, they don't equal what Congo produces. There is no green energy transition without Congo's cobalt. It's rainforest. It's a part of the second largest rainforest in the world. And it's a tropical rainforest that sequesters more carbon than all of the rainforests combined, including the Amazon. So when we're talking about the planet and climate, Congo is indispensable again, all right? It's the home of the largest tropical peatlands in the world. The peatlands are about the size of England. And they trap the amount of carbon that you would see released in 20 years of US pollution from the combustion engine. So but from the period of enslavement, when 4 out of every 10 Africans were extracted from the Congo region to the Americas, to today, the most valuable resource is the 100 million Congolese that occupy that space in the heart of the African continent with a median age of 17. So you know you have to be engaging the youth because for all intents and purposes, the African continent is a continent of teenagers, right? If you look at the median ages throughout the continent. So we rallied around the Congo, right? Really responding to the likes of Fanon. You know, toward the African Revolution, Fanon says, the fate of all of us is at stake in the Congo, right? In his last letter to his wife, Pauline, literally from the grave, Patrice Emery Lumumba said to the Congolese people, he says, we are not alone. Africa, Asia, free and liberated people from every corner of the world will always be found on the side of the Congolese. So to be engaged around the Congo is a Pan-African undertaking. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not married to the borders that were created by the European powers, but we know that the heart of the African continent is indispensable for the advancement of Pan-Africanism. And we're not the ones who are saying that, we're just reading Nkrumah, right? We're just reading Fanon, all right? We're reading Touré, right? There's a reason why Sekou Touré sent our sister Pan-Africanist André Blouin from the Central African Republic, who worked with Touré in 1958 to organize the Guinea masses to say no to France. He sent her to Congo, where she became Lumumba's chief of protocol. You know, he called upon Félix Moumé, our brilliant Cameroonian Pan-Africanist who was struck down by by the French to go to assist Lumumba. So the Pan-Africanists, post-independence Pan-Africanists were clear about the centrality of the Congo in realizing the United States of Africa. And it's that tradition that we've picked up and organizing with Congolese youth, organizing in what the Congolese call Congo Profond, and with local grassroots indigenous leaders in the rainforest, in the mining areas, because we know we don't, it is said that Chairman Mao said that he who controls the Congo controls the world. We know that's hyperbolic language, but we're clear that once Congolese control the Congo, once Africans control the Congo, it would accelerate the Pan-African project tremendously. And that was the idea that Toure had, the idea that Nkrumah had, why he was so sad about the loss of Lumumba, who he saw basically as a son, and Lumumba saw him as a father figure. So we're organizing with youth across the country in the areas of art, music, theater, you name it, whatever area of people's activity, organizing in the mining areas, working with folks who are trying to rescue the children from the mining areas, organizing the women in the mining areas, organizing with street children in Kinshasa, trying to reach them early and introduce them to Pan-African ideology, and certainly acquaint them with the greatest Pan-African champion of their country, in Patrice Lumumba, getting them to recite his speeches, getting them to embrace his ideology of African nationalism, self-sufficiency, self-determination, Pan-Africanism, internationalism. Those are 4 principles in which organizing the children in Kinshasa and different parts of the Congo, and with an understanding, and the youth on the ground, that they have a responsibility, not just to the Congo, but to Africa. Like they have a special responsibility based on the geographic space that they occupy, that space that European geographers at the dawn of the 20th century say is a geological scandal, because so much wealth is packed into one place. They were mesmerized. Is that great piece of cake that King Leopold II talked about. So that's our rationale. You know, the simple syllogism for us is a strong Congo equals a strong Africa equals a strong African world. And those are the principles we're organizing on, with a focus on the Congo, but not certainly not limited to the Congo. So I think I'll stop there. I feel like I've gone on and on, you know, just to engage folks and questions about the work that we're doing and how we see our folks, Africans abroad, the ways in which they can be engaged in our work and the work of other folks that we are, you know, in partnership and collaboration, solidarity with, not just in the Congo, but in different parts of the African continent.
Well, thank you, Brother Mo. That was a lot of cake that you had. You're putting all those pieces together. With that large piece in the Congo, I must, you know, give you credit for being so, I guess, articulate with all that is happening in Africa and paying attention. It's a lot to cover, and you're doing it well, my brother. So what I'm going to do is I'm you know what, I'll open the floor. I have had a few questions, but I think it's best for me to open the floor and let anyone there who wants to ask a question go right ahead. There's one question here by brother. Let me take this first in the chat. When exactly are the 3rd, 8th PAC and the 9th or Pan-African Congress and the 9th Pan-African taking place? Okay. So when is the 3rd, 8th? The 3rd, 8th Pan-African Congress and the 9th taking place. I guess he.
I think it's a third, if I'm not mistaken. But I've read declarations from the previous 8th Pan-African Congress. I suppose it's I'm not sure. I think, in fact, I know the organizers of the 9th Congress were reaching out to the organizers of the 8th Congress and trying to bring the two together in one Congress. So I don't think anything solid has been the last that I've heard have been nailed down for the 8th, if it is going to take place. I know there's a concerted effort to try and bring the two together. The 9th Pan-African Congress is scheduled for right now October of 2024, but they haven't nailed down a solid date yet. But they had the preliminary conference in Togo in May, in the 3rd week of May, where they had ministers from different African countries. They had representatives from different from Caribbean and Latin America, particularly Brazil, and African Union, of course, was present. So it was a kickoff that occurred in May, and it's a joint initiative by the African Union and the Togolese government. It'll be interesting to see the kind of pushback that may come from this top-down model. But I think figures like Naledi, our sister Naledi Pandor, the foreign minister of South Africa, lend a tremendous amount of credibility to it, right? I think, with her being very much engaged, and then South Africa being a part of the rotation of the regional conferences that they're going to organize. So we may see a way for the grassroots to be a part of that effort. And as I shared, the Ayadama of Togo is just like huge problems. I'm sure some Togolese quote-unquote pro-democracy forces may not look too kindly upon that. But to Togo's credit, right, they didn't side with ECOWAS, right, in putting a blockade on Niger. They provided a path for Niger. They weren't in lockstep, with countries like Benin and Ivory Coast and Senegal. They distinguished themselves by not joining the calls for ECOWAS, where we saw the French government was trying to use ECOWAS as an instrument to reverse the coup that took place in Niger. So it'd be interesting to see how they move.
Okay. All right. Yes. Thank you again. Any other questions coming? Well, there's one in the chat, but let me hear from if there's anyone else in the audience. Oh, Babu Congo has his hand. Yes, Babu Congo, you go ahead.
Yes, I don't know if the people from Uganda and there's like two countries that keep attacking the resources that in the Congo, the rebel group. I don't think he mentioned anything about them.
Well, Museveni, Yari.
Yeah.
I think he might be talking also about the question of this might be the
M23.
And those rebel groups supposedly, and
Yeah.
how are they affecting the youth, let's say, or the Congolese stability.
Yeah, yeah, in the east of the Congo. If
Yeah.
you permit me, how are we doing on time?
We've got, well, it's 8:48. Well, we're open until 9:30, but you know, like
You don't want to go all the way away. Okay, let me just say this.
You got time.
This is a really important question, right?
Okay.
And I'd like to give just a little bit of backdrop to the extent that I can.
Okay. Go right ahead.
In 1998, right, Bill Clinton traveled to Africa. And out of his travels to Africa came what is to be known as the Entebbe Principles, right? And you can do a Google on Entebbe Principles, Bill Clinton, and it'll come up. And basically, at the time, Madeleine Albright was the Secretary of State, and Susan Rice was the Assistant Secretary of State for Africa. And the Entebbe Principles were embodied by select individuals that the Clinton administration had put its stamp on, right? They called them the new breed of African leaders, Renaissance leaders, right? And chief among them was Meles Zenawi of Ethiopia, right? The TPLF, Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, and Paul Kagame of Rwanda, right? So these were they had the stamp of the United States, the imprimatur, right? And when you have the stamp of the United States, as we all know, what that does is that it gives you political and diplomatic cover for the crimes that you commit, the war crimes and crimes against humanity, right? And probably the classic case that we see is Israel. Israel can commit whatever crime it wants with impunity, right? And it's got the cover of the United States, right? They can't touch Israel at the International Criminal Court, can't touch Israel at the United Nations. Israel can commit genocide and the United States got their back. Well, these proxy leaders in Africa, although to a lesser extent, benefited from that. Now, in the Congo, where the United States installed Mobutu, right, in 1965, and maintained him in power. Every time the Congolese rose up to get rid of him, the U.S. would go in and bomb, you know, the resistance fighters, get Moroccan troops to go in. So they maintained Mobutu. And it was clear by 1997 that his time was up. And at the time, at least you had a burgeoning democracy movement. That is a bottom-up movement in the Congo, right, with populist leaders, right? So instead of the United States was concerned, right? So what it did was that it worked with Congo's neighbors, primarily Rwanda and Uganda, to depose Mobutu, right, through an invasion in 1996, and really put a Congolese face on it. And they put Laurent Desire Kabila, who was a protege of Lumumba, who was worked with Che in the Congo in '65 when Che Guevara went to the Congo. Incidentally, in Che's diaries, Che said prophetically, looking at Laurent Desire Kabila, he said, with leaders like these, Congo will be colonized for another 100 years, right? So the U.S. backed an invasion primarily by Rwanda and Uganda, but also by Angola, right, in 1996. And the reason why Angola joined to get rid of Mobutu, because Mobutu was the head guy of the CIA in Central Africa. And he was funneling resources to UNITA, right, and Jonas Savimbi. So Angolans felt if we got rid of Mobutu, we can cut that umbilical cord between the CIA, Mobutu, and Savimbi, right? So Angola joined the invasion. They overthrew Mobutu and installed Kabila. Kabila didn't have an army of his own. He didn't have anything, really. He was just a puppet for Rwanda and Uganda. But he wasn't And to demonstrate that, there's a guy by the name, you can do a Google on his name. His name is James Kabarebe. James Kabarebe. He's now the Rwandan foreign minister. At the time, he was a part of the invasion in 1996 of the Congo. And he Kagame installed him as the chief of the military of the Congo, right? So the Congolese military was being controlled by the Rwandan, James Kabarebe. And this didn't sit well with Kabila. And he was trying to shake himself loose. He didn't have a military, he was installed. So what Kabila did was he reached out to the Southern African Development Community. And because Congo had joined SADC. And Zimbabwe under Mugabe, Angola under Dos Santos, and to some extent Namibia. I think Zimbabwe was heading up the military organ of SADC. They all said we're going to come to the side of the Congolese to push back what is clearly a U.S.-backed finance offensive on the part of Rwanda, led by Paul Kagame, and Uganda, led by Yoweri Museveni. And they did this in 1998. And this time, we find with Angola having dealt with the Savimbi issue, we find Angola coming to the side of the Congolese and Kabila with its SADC compatriots to beat back Rwanda and Uganda's second invasion of the Congo. So they invaded twice, one in 96, a second time in 1998. And came to a standstill as a result of the offensive that was led by SADC against Rwanda and Uganda. And they had a peace deal in 2002. Now, the United Nations published four studies in 2001, where they listed some 85 foreign companies, right, that was plundering the Congo in cahoots with Kagame and Museveni. And they said, the United Nations says, Kagame and Museveni are the mafia dons of the plunder of the Congo, right? Now we know that may be exaggerating a bit because they're just middlemen, because they're not refining, processing anything. They're getting, the timber, the gold, the coltan out to boost their own economy. And they're the ones who triggered the 6 million people dead. The 1996 to 1998 war, some 200,000 or so, according to Amnesty International and the United Nations, perished in that conflict. And then from 1998 to 2007, according to the International Rescue Committee, you had 5.4 million Congolese who perished. Now, throughout this time, from this time forward, what we've seen when Rwanda and Uganda, in fact, they had such a scramble for the minerals in the Congo that Rwanda and Uganda wound up fighting each other on Congolese soil to see who could control minerals in Kisangani. That's Lumumba's home, used to be Lumumba's home base. And the Congolese government tried to take both Rwanda and Uganda to the International Court of Justice for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and plunder of Congolese resources. And they were successful. In 2005, the International Court of Justice ruled that Uganda ought to pay $10 billion in reparations to the Congo for the crimes that it committed there. They weren't successful against Rwanda because Rwanda is not party to the International Court of Justice. So they couldn't really bring a case against them, even though they tried to. So to this very day, when we talk about the M23, the M23 is really the rump forces dating back to 1996, after in 2002, when George Bush put pressure on Rwanda to lift its occupation of Eastern Congo. What the Rwanda Kagame did was develop militia groups that would function as proxies to destabilize the east of the Congo so that Rwanda can continue to get the minerals out of the Congo. And they went through various iterations. The M23 that we see today, they were called the CNDP before, and it was in 2012 when President Obama got on the phone with Paul Kagame. At the time, John Kerry was Secretary of State. Got on the phone with with Paul Kagame and told him like, hey man, you know, just back off pretty much of the Congo, just back off, you know. And President Obama withheld $200,000 in military aid to Rwanda. Rwanda's troops are being trained by Afrikan, so none of that breaks. You know, they've gotten $1 billion plus from the U.S. But the fact that the U.S. withheld $200,000, then the other European nations started withholding other military aid to Rwanda, because Rwanda was backing the M23 that was destabilizing the east of the Congo. So Obama put limited diplomatic pressure on Kagame because he's an ally. Kagame does for the US and France in Africa what they don't want to do for themselves. Rwanda is the largest contributor to the UN peacekeeping forces in Africa for sure, maybe even in the world, but definitely in Africa, right? As much as Rwanda rails against the UN, they are the largest contributor on the African continent. So with the diplomatic pressure from, if we want to call it that, from Obama, and then the United Nations, who's had a peacekeeping force in the Congo, some 20,000 or so, it's been reduced, called MONUC or NAS MONUSCO. That mandate was strengthened by the United Nations to have an offensive mandate, where they developed what they call a force intervention brigade, where Malawi, Tanzania, and South Africa could send in their troops, soldiers, to combat the Rwanda-backed M23. So with the diplomatic pressure from the United States, the force intervention brigade, South Africa, Malawi, and Tanzania, and then the Congolese military strengthened itself, they were able to beat back the M23. But the M23, they weren't put in jail or anything or incarcerated. They went back into Rwanda and Uganda. So 2020, 21, they resurfaced. So it's the same issue, hasn't fundamentally changed. It's not something that's recent. It's part of a 25-year war of aggression and plunder led primarily by Rwanda and Uganda. And Africa Confidential issued a really critical report just a couple weeks ago, where they lay out the reasons why Rwanda has resuscitated the M23 to be back in the Congo to destabilize the east of the Congo, and now threatens to occupy the city of Goma and even go further. So I just wanted to give that background to share that this isn't a recent issue. What is happening in the east of the Congo could not happen without the backing, first and foremost, of the United States, and then secondly, without the backing of the United Kingdom.
I have another question. I'm trying to find out the Holocaust that was done by Belgium, the numbers. For some reason, everywhere I go doesn't give me the numbers of Congolese that been killed, but also most people don't know that there's a war that was going on in our lifetime that's 6.5 million people died, and, which I consider a Holocaust also.
Yes, absolutely, a silent one. The first one was silent too, because you'll find people talking about the Armenian genocide, early 1900s, but they never mentioned the, King Leopold's genocide from 1885 to 1908. King Leopold decimated the Congolese, his rule, his private ownership, decimated the Congolese population by half. The general consensus is about 10 million people, right, perished as the king extracted rubber and ivory. And I want to say something about that's instructive for us today, right? In this respect, that we hear people talking about King Leopold and what King Leopold did in the Congo in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But you really cannot talk about, if you're going to talk about King Leopold's atrocities, you have to talk about the atrocities today as well, right? Because what has fundamentally changed, or I shouldn't say fundamentally, but well, in the case of the Congo, what the Europeans did, right? We find today Africans have taken over from them. And I'm talking about a particular type of African. I'm talking about the Kagames and the Musevenis, right? They're the ones who triggered the 6 million deaths, right? We have a situation where I spoke at length about what Nkrumah did, what Sékou Touré did, what Modibo Keïta did, right? They embraced Congo and made it a part of the Pan-African project, right? And they saw it as being part and parcel of the advancement of Africans writ large, right? But with Kagame and Museveni, who many people dub as Pan-Africanists, Museveni famously said that Congo is a banana plantation, right? You go in and you get what you want. That's how he sees it. And that's how he has functioned. And we have the data to back it up, the studies, it's the numbers, right? In terms of gold exports, timber exports coming out of Uganda, Rwanda being the largest exporter of coltan in the world, when we know they don't produce the coltan that Congo produces, right? Tin and wolframite, right? All of that. But what I want to say about King Leopold II and that era that's instructive for us today in the era of social media. Here it is that atrocities were being committed in the Congo, in the heart of the African continent. And we have a figure like George Washington Williams, right? A Civil War hero, an elected official in the state of Ohio, an attendee at Howard University, travels to the Congo to see what's happening, right to King Leopold. I want to see what's going on, goes to the Congo. And he in essence says, what we see unfolding here is crimes against humanity. So this solidarity with the Congo, right, has a lineage and a tradition from George Washington Williams. And I highly encourage you to read our brother John Hope Franklin. Interestingly enough, one of the great historians of Africans in the US. George Washington Williams was also dubbed as the first African historian. They've put that, I've seen people put that stamp on him. But John Hope Franklin wrote a book called The Biography of George Washington Williams. So I highly recommend that you read it, that here it is, no internet, no airplanes, none of that. George Washington Williams in the Congo, confronting King Leopold. There with William Shepherd, the Black Presbyterian minister, who recruited people to go to the Congo with him from historically Black colleges and universities that were engaged in the Congo at the time. There's a book called Congo Love Song by Ira Dorkin, where he traces, he goes from George Washington Williams, William Shepherd, to Langston Hughes, and Langston Hughes' engagement with the Congo. And of course, Malcolm X, probably no other modern figure has been engaged in the Congo the way Malcolm X is in terms of his addressing the Congo issue, right up to today with our sister, Dr. Yvonne Sion. So we have a tradition. It's been a long tradition of anti-colonial resistance around the Congo. And Congolese have been connected to, I think I've shared on this platform before, to the Pan-African movement. One of the most famous figures in the Congo, in the history of the Congo, is a gentleman by the name of Simon Kimbangu, who resisted Belgian colonialism. And he was jailed. He spent more time in jail than Nelson Mandela did, 30 years. And the missionaries, what they would do, when, they would go with William Shepherd and them, they would take Garvey's publication to the Congo. And Simon Kimbangu was inspired by Marcus Garvey because he was reading Garvey literature, right? And buying into the vision of a Pan-African vision. Today, the Simon Kimbangu, they have a church after him, and they're called the Kimbanguists, that are still in the Congo today. And as a part of their lore, because of their engagement with Garvey, because of what the progressive movement they saw coming out of Africans abroad, part of the allure is that one day, you know, our lost brothers and sisters will come back and join with us to liberate Congo and Africa as part of the Kimbanguist allure. So I say that to say that it's not unusual, it's not special for us to be engaged in the Congo. We're not doing anything new. We're following not only in the tradition of the Nkrumahs and the Tourés, but in the tradition of the George Washington Williams and the William Shepherds.
Thank you. Thank you, my brother, again, for that extension on the commentaries. It was really good historically. Some of us, like I've been taking notes. I had not read on George Washington Williams, and I certainly, that's something I have to get my hands on. So thank you again. You've never disappointed us, and you haven't done that again tonight. And we have a lot of stuff to go over from what you've given us tonight. But let me ask before I was going to close, but let me ask if anybody has any questions at this point in time.
Yes, brother Monsi, I left a question in there about how the youth got interested in promoting African consciousness and self-sufficiency for their country. What started them?
Yes. These are there's several youth throughout the country that are engaged in that, and but these youth, these particular youth that we're talking about, and we're going to try and put together a grounding with them on around Black Consciousness Day in Brazil, November 20th, right? Maybe around a couple of days, the 18th. I'll get the information out in case you want to join us. But there's an organization in the east of the Congo, right in the heart of the violence, the conflict area, called Yole Africa. And it's led by a gentleman by the name of Petna Endalika Katondolo. And he's a Pan-Africanist. And he has created a space. Really, the space was created. It was a product. There's an active volcano that's sitting right there in Goma. So not only do they have to worry about conflict, they have to worry about the volcano erupting. And it erupted in 2021. But Yole came up, formed out of I think it was a 2000 eruption of the volcano. And with the instability from natural disaster, the instability from conflict, he wanted to create a space for young people where they can have refuge and be treated as whole human beings, whole Africans, right? And not just somebody that you're rescuing and in an act of charity. But he formed an institution that in almost like Max Nefried model of human existence, where it's not just the material existence, but it has to do with your emotional in terms of art and music and dance and theater. That's critical to making you a holistic person. So he created that environment where child soldiers would come in, street children would come in, people seeking refuge. And fundamental to that space is returning to the source. He himself is in the tradition, the priest tradition, and drawing up on traditional, I guess you can say traditional African knowledge and wisdom. And we're making a film with him right now. It's called Basanja, where he is bringing all of that out in a film to demonstrate that we have. I know we run down the material resources that the Congo has, but the film to demonstrate that we have all that we need in terms of philosophy, knowledge, wisdom, understanding, ethics, right? To rely upon that African motif, let's say, for our liberation. So that's what he's brought to those young people, and they've embraced it, and they're going out, and it's challenging, right? It's challenging trying to to convince and persuade their fellow Congolese that this is the way, right? And it's very difficult. We screened a film in Congo in Harlem during Congo Week this year called Colette and Justin. And it's done by a Congolese brother who's in France. And what he does is he talks to his grandparents in the film. And if you watch that film, you really get a keen sense of what went into colonizing our minds, right? The case study of the Congo, in terms of the indoctrination that was reinforced by violence. And when you see that, you really get a sense of what it's gonna take for us to decolonize the African mind, right? And that's what these young people are doing. Their primary mission is to decolonize the African mind and turn African youth back to the source, back to the traditional wisdom, back to the traditional knowledge, in every conceivable way that you can think of.
Ashe. Now, before let me give some to get into the chat here, and there might be some questions. Okay, Dr. Chenzara has put in the chat some references regarding the joint Entebbe principles. So if anyone wants to check that out, she's got quite a few references in the chat. Also, let's see, Dr. Chenzara has said, exceptional information, and Brother Maurice, you are amazingly concise with sharing such a magnitude of historic history in less than 2 hours. Please share a reference and resources that may be read and studied to learn about these realities of our African legacy history in the Congo and beyond. Sante. Now, again, she has put something else to be shared in share this with the viewers. A film by friend. Oh, it's your film she's sharing here as a reference. That's on YouTube, Crisis in the Congo, Uncovering the Truth.
Yes.
And then there's Colette et Justin, 2022 film, trailer and information. And that's a website, www.imdb.com.
Dr. Chin is on it.
Oh, well, you know,
she is tough.
Yeah,
she is tough.
That's Dr. Chen, you know, that's
she's
you know,
she's no joke.
that's she you're the one of the people who we're very proud of in the UNIA-ALC RC.
Oh yeah.
She is
nothing but love for Dr.
Yeah,
Chen.
she's the second assistant president general.
That's what's up.
Also, she's in charge of the Central American Caribbean.
Yes.
And she's always working, and that's a sister that I don't know what she's using, but she's sure has a lot of energy.
Yeah, African juice.
And doing a lot of work. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's see now. It's now 9:17. I can give you folks about 10 minutes if you have any questions. Other than that, Brother Mo, I have the one question I had about this Mazalendo people in Eastern Congo. What can you say about them?
Oh, you mean
Wazalendo?
Wazalendo?
Yes.
Wazalendo folks are really part of the recent tradition that was before my mind, where basically, you know, in a number of instances, when the Rwandan forces come into East Congo, they chase away the Congolese military runs. You know?
Okay.
And when they run, they steal from the population, they rape the women, right? So many communities have been left to their own devices. So early on, you had what you call the Mai Mai, which are community self-defense forces that are
Mm.
fighting to maintain control over their land. And Wazalendo come in that same tradition. We hear that they're getting some support from the Congolese government as well. But the best way to describe them are community self-defense forces that are going to fight you to the last man, the last woman, to maintain control over their land. And it's really, well, I won't get into it.
It's an absolute necessity.
But yeah, that's
goes
it.
to show the resilience of some of the folks despite all that is happening
Yes,
in the
yes,
eastern
yes.
part of the Congo.
Yes.
Thank you, my brother. If there's nothing else, I'll say we're going to close this. Thank you again, my brother.
I'm the one who has to thank you, man. You all have UNIA. You just opened the door for us for, gosh, I think I've lost track of the years now. You know.
Well, listen, you listen. The kind of work you're doing, how many people can we go to? I mean, you know, you're outstanding, and you know, when we get a lot of good information, we're educated by your organization. So, and there are quite a few people. But there was one brother who was part of the Division 330. I don't see him on here this evening. But yeah, you know, Paul, brother Paul.
Yes, brother Paul. That's right.
Yeah.
I didn't see brother Sangora on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, yeah,
But,
brother Sangora. There, you know, there's lots of issues.
Brother Cook is usually on.
Yeah.
We go way back.
Yeah. Well, he's on.
Oh, is he on? Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's
big
on.
Shout out.
He's just being quiet, but he's on.
Big shout out. You remember back in the day, he must have thought we were crazy, running into his office and like, print this flyer. We're organizing here.
Oh, so you.
So he was ready to print whatever we needed printed.
Yeah, that's one
Yeah,
of
our sister Julianne,
one of the key people in
long time supporter.
Yeah, that's a key person in Division 330 as well.
Yeah.
UNIA-ALC 2020.
Yeah. So it's family. It's home.
We just love that. Yeah. We we love that, brother. So in any event, you know, don't be surprised if we come back to you very soon in the early part of next year.
Anytime, man.
But you know, things are hot, and it may get hotter.
Yes.
We may need your you know, your view of what's happening. So thanks again.
Anytime.
Oh no, Sister Julianne, I think I saw your hand up. Do you have a question?
I'm gonna leave my question till the next time I see you, Maurice, but I hope that's very soon.
Yes. Peace and blessings, Sister Julianne. Yes.
Okay. All right, folks. This Freedom Friday Forum, it will be uploaded to YouTube if you want to review it, and it will still be on Division 330, the UNIA Division 330 RC 2020 Facebook page for a while. It'll be there, you know, so long as you know we're not going to take it down. So,
all right.
You know, so long as it's allowed to be there, it'll be there. So you can review it on our Facebook page.
Great.
And we have to remind you too that when you see this on YouTube, you click the like buttons so that we can start having well, some kind of digital record of what's going on, or how many times or how much people like what we're putting out there. So, all right. So all folks, good night and goodbye. Baba Congo, you had something to say?
One little thing to say that the next Freedom Friday, we're going to talk about brothers in the Pacific who are suffering like crazy. It's another Holocaust that's happening over there. Indonesia.
West Papua, the West Papua situation. Yes, we're going to have Brother Raki App, hopefully, as long, you know, he's about, I don't know, 8-9 hours away from us, and hopefully we can catch him. He's very busy as the spokesperson for the organization, Free West Papua. So, you know, we hope to having him on the fourth Friday, which is the next Freedom Friday Forum day. So watch out for that, and I hope we get the similar interest, because of course, when we say West Papua, a lot of people still don't know where that is, and they still don't know who are there. This is Black people, and we're concerned about what's happening to them. And again, this is another third world developing nation, so to speak, that is persecuting our people. They militarily. We're talking about Indonesia here. They militarily occupy West Papua, and they've been doing that for close to 60 years. And what's happening in Israel and Palestine is not different. And we're hoping that as much as African people are out there in support of Palestine, we can see them coming out and being in support of what is happening in West Papua. And I have a theory about that, but I'm not going to mention it, because I don't want Black folks to think that I'm negative about about things they do. So, but I think Black folks should be a lot more interested in what is happening in West Papua, and take interest and get out there. We have an embassy in Washington, D.C. For those of us in Washington, D.C., we need to organize and do the same thing people are doing outside the Israeli embassy, or outside the French embassy, or outside any of those other countries that are engaged in repression of people who are seeking their freedom. So I thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you again next Freedom Friday Forum. All right, thank you, everyone. And I'll close with our motto: one God,
One God,
one aim,
one
One
aim,
destiny.
one destiny.
one destiny.
Peace.
Thank you, Adian.
Thank
Peace
you.
and love.
Peace.
All right. Brother Heru, we can close.